The first time I went to Palestine was 2007, and it was really the sort of, the moment where my life changed, really. It's when I came back and I talked to my parents and my friends about what I saw, they still wouldn't believe it. You're telling me there's Israeli snipers in the watchtowers shooting at kids playing football in Aida refugee camp near Bethlehem. I was like, yeah, that's what's happening. They just couldn't work it out, And Palestine became more and more a part of my life until it became my life. But we are, believe me, experiencing the end of Zionism.
Welcome to another episode of This Is Not a Watermelon. My name is Mikey Mhenna. Today on the series, we have Frank Barat, who is a writer, an editor, an activist, filmmaker, whose work has been focused on Palestine and global solidarity, sort of, I think, justice movements more broadly. Frank has been part of a lot of different books that you probably are heard of, including On Palestine with Noam Chomsky and Pappé, Freedom is a Constant Struggle, A Struggle Makes Us Human, all the different stuff. Frank, welcome to the series.
Hey, hi, Mikey, and thanks for having me on.
I should say before we get started that we're recording this on April 18th, Friday, April 18th. I'm not sure when this is coming out, but just so you know, those of you who are listening. Frank, let me just start with a basic question. Why do you care about Palestine? How did that start?
Okay, it's an interesting one because a lot of people actually have asked me about this over the last 20 years that I've been kind of politically active on the issue. And I'm going to try to make a long story short. This is something I'm still sort of thinking about it myself and trying to understand. I think I was raised in a family of like 6. I've got 5 brothers and sisters, kind of proletarian. My dad is a worker, and my mom, we were not rich. So I think the kind of injustice question in terms of our daily lives when I was young and stuff was always something that I was aware of. And I guess when I saw injustices towards others, I also felt like kind of a duty to stand in solidarity with them from a very young age. When it comes to Palestine, and I'm now jumping about 20 years, when it comes to Palestine, I became really aware of Palestine late, very late. I think I was about 27. Obviously, I knew, like a lot of people, what Palestine was. I was aware that there was an issue there. There was a conflict, and
for context, you grew up in France.
Yeah, I grew up in France. Yeah. And actually, it's interesting because it's when I moved to London that Palestine became a lot clearer in my head. So anyway, when I moved to London, I was about 20 years old. I started years after, around 26 years old, getting involved with like local Palestine solidarity campaign chapters. You distribute leaflets outside the underground, you organize small events, film screenings and stuff. But and again, I'm trying to make a long story short.
Yeah.
The first time I went to Palestine was 2007. And it was really the sort of, the moment where my life changed, really. And I think it's Arundhati Roy, the Indian scholar and author, who said that once you've seen it, you can't unsee it. And that's exactly what I felt when I went to Palestine in 2007. And also a lot of Palestinians. I mean, most Palestinians were telling me, it's great that you came, but your job starts when you go back to London or Belgium or France, So
yeah, like when you go is when they give you stuff. When you leave, that's when you actually have to repay that.
100%. Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, I felt that, I'd seen it. I started to properly understand it. And also a lot of the stuff organized before I went, you had always these people telling you, but you've never been. What are you talking about? You don't know. As if we need to I've been to a place to know exactly what's happening. But anyway, so I also
like
felt
I know Antarctica is cold.
Yeah, exactly, 100%.
Yeah.
So I felt, but still, I felt a lot stronger. I could tell them, yeah, I've been also on top of watching 200 documentaries and reading 200 reports and stuff. So yeah, 2007 was like a turning point, and Palestine became more and more a part of my life until it became my life. And again, obviously, I'm not like a white savior or anything, but just Palestine became my life, from 2007 onwards. Yeah.
Can you talk about that moment in 2007 and sort of the idea of what you saw that you couldn't unsee?
So it's interesting as well, because, when I went in 2007, I remember telling my friends and family and stuff, and people were worried, right? You're going for them into a war zone in a way. I was also worried, I'd never been to like a dangerous place. And I also went in my head at the time, I was like a sort of, it's a conflict, two-state solution. Obviously, I called myself pro-Palestinian, but I still this vision of like, they both need a state, etc. And so I went with the Israeli Committee Against House Demolitions, led by Jeff Alper. So we had it was called like a study tour. So we had 10 days in the West Bank, also in Palestine 48, also known as Israel. And we met lots of Palestinians, NGOs, charities, also Israelis, obviously progressive Israelis. And I saw, we went obviously through many checkpoints. I went to Bilain twice because I stayed for 2 Fridays for the demonstrations against the wall. And I think what touched me, and it's very important for the rest of my political journey, is stories. I saw people that lived through the most horrific stuff, but the stories, like human stories, really, really touched me. And also when I went in 2007, I had bought like a mini DV camcorder. So I filmed a lot of interviews with internationals, with people in my group, also with Palestinians, also with a few Israelis, and actually made a film myself that I edited myself that I called 9 Days in Palestine. The interesting part is when I came back to London and when I saw my family in France and stuff, they were like, so how was it? It's a war zone. What did you see? And I had a massive smile on my face all the time. And I said, I think I've spent some of the best days of my life. It was so much joy, so much humor, so much beauty, so much amazing food. And I also realized that, because we see Palestine as this war zone, we forget, people don't realize how beautiful Palestine is. Palestinians are, the food is, the landscapes are. And that also made me realize that the struggle, the way the Palestinians live the struggle, is also beautiful and exhilarating, and there's a lot of joy in the struggle. So, and again, to cut a long story short, the funny thing is when I came back and I talked to my parents and my friends about what I saw, they still wouldn't believe it. Because it was I was like, this is mad. What are you talking about? Like, you're telling me there's Israeli snipers in the watchtowers shooting at kids playing football in Aida refugee camp near Bethlehem. I was like, yeah, that's what's happening. They just couldn't, there is like, I guess, images and reality when it comes to Palestine. They couldn't work it out, So yeah, that was like part of my journey and duty was firstly to convince my friends and my close circle that what was happening was, very one-sided in a way. Yeah.
I want to talk a little bit about that, sort of the obligation, the sort of the responsibility of that, right? Like you see this, you go back to France. How do you translate that into action?
Yeah, that's very interesting. That's so crucial because like right now, obviously we've been not living, but we've been
witnessing it,
witnessing a genocide live on our screens, and a lot of people feeling paralyzed, useless. They really don't know where to start, what to do to show support for Palestine. And but when I came back, I wanted to tell the stories first, and I thought, this is the way I'm going to touch people. So again, I'd filmed about 45 interviews with, like, you know, healthcare workers, with, you know, random people in the streets, with bakers, with teachers, with activists. So I started to show, so I made this little film called 9 Days in Palestine, and I started to show it to people, to friends, organize little screenings, like 15 people in London, you know. And I started writing also about what I saw, and I started, so this was the first step, was like, I wasn't sure what I could do, but I was sure that just telling the stories that I saw was, you know, the first step. But then very, very quickly, I got involved. So I went to Palestine in 2007. I think mid-2008, I got involved with an initiative called the Russell Tribunal on Palestine, which was a very big initiative. The Russell Tribunal has got a long history of, like, popular citizens tribunal in regards to Vietnam, to Latin America, and the rest. And I became involved, and I became the coordinator of this project. And this transformed, again, my life, and this transformed the way I could be politically active. Because, like, the Russell Tribunal was like putting lawyers with activists, with filmmakers, with cultural figures together in the same room, and think about what can we do for Palestine. So this was really another sort of life-changing moment for me.
Yeah. I want to talk specifically about the Russell Tribunal. If you go to the About page, the first line is, "May this tribunal prevent the crime of silence." Talk a little bit about the history of the tribunal, and its technical authority and its aspirational authority.
It's very interesting you quoting this man. It's actually Bertrand Russell who said that, you know, and I hadn't really thought about it until today. And today, it's, you know, it's very relevant as well. You know, the crime of silence. You know, being silent is being complicit. There's no two ways about it. Once you know, you have to speak out one way or another. And so the tribunal comes from a long history of, like, popular tribunals that started in 1968, with the British philosopher Bertrand Russell and the French philosopher Jean-Paul Sartre, about the US war of aggression in Vietnam. And then you had, in the 70s, tribunals around military juntas in Latin America, Pinochet, Videla, etc. as well. And this idea of, like, citizens, popular tribunals, became a way for people, and it's very important, to tell their stories. You know, I think people don't understand that once you, if you are being oppressed, colonized, tortured, one of the hardest things, and we're seeing it again with Gaza, is people not believing that you really are. You know, so just being able to tell your story, this is what's happening, in front of a platform, was key. And a lot of Palestinians were saying, just being able to tell my story is really, really crucial. So that this was, like, one of the really very important step of the tribunal. But the tribunal was very legalistic as well. So on the jury and on the legal team, we had the most sort of well-known jury of, you know, former jurist of the UN, of, like, Belgian courts, French courts, Spanish courts. So the idea was to say, we have international law. You know, this was decided by the powerful states, but you're not implementing it when it comes to Palestine. So can we use what you've put in place to show that if international law was actually implemented, what could happen? So we raised, and we started from the point that Israel is guilty. The tribunal was never about, is Israel guilty of colonization or occupation? We were like, there's, you know, ample evidence that
it's self-evident.
Yeah. So we addressed third-party complicity. So institutions that are complicit in the occupation, states that are complicit in the occupation, people that are complicit in the occupation, and corporations. I think maybe I've said it already, but corporations. So each session had a very specific goal. And so we had, one session in London, one in Barcelona, one in Cape Town, one in New York, and 2 in Brussels. In New York, we addressed US complicity and the UN role as well. In South Africa, it was very different because we decided to touch upon the apartheid analogy. And this was very interesting because a lot of the people wanted us to focus on apartheid in the West Bank, but we really pushed to have a more broader overview of apartheid towards the Palestinian people, which meant in historical Palestine, but also in the diaspora, etc. And then I'll shut up. But the interesting part is that when Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch released their reports on apartheid, which was 3 years ago, maybe now, or 2-3 years ago, their reports were incredibly similar that the report we released about 10 years earlier. And our reports, again, were not like 2 pages. On average, they were about 100 and 120 pages. So, and what's interesting as well, when you see the South Africa case against Israel at the ICJ, a lot of the team, the South African team, was part of the legal advising committee of the Russell Tribunal, So in a nutshell, this was what the tribunal was about. And also, maybe that's one of the most important things of the tribunal. It was to put people together. So we had like national organizing committees in Ireland, in Spain, in the US, in Palestine. And then for 3 days, you had all these people together. So there was a lot of side meetings, workshops, between the sessions and stuff. And it created, I think, this network that we still use today. And also a network of legal advisors and a network of cultural figures and personalities, which,
How resilient do you think that network has proved to be, especially now in the last few months? You see this insane legal campaign against not even activists, against anyone who's just holding space for conversation in academia in the US. There's been basically almost McCarthy era style witch hunt, basically, in Europe. How have those networks actually proven to be effective, or not as effective as we need them to be?
Yeah, I'm not sure we can talk about effectiveness because in terms of concrete results and victories, it'll be a stretch to say that we've achieved a lot. But for example, a lot of the people now in Palestine Legal, or like people like Noura Erika was in the Russell Tribunal. She's now fighting for justice towards Palestinians in the US. Michael Mansfield, Casey, has just launched this legal action against 10 British, dual national that served in Gaza. He was one of the jury members of the tribunal. Daniel McCover, a legal expert, has been key in all the universal jurisdiction cases. John Reynolds, an Irish lawyer, is incredibly involved in 10 cases all around the world. So, and they work together. And this was the thing about the tribunal as well. They know each other now. They work together. They make, and it makes the work they do a lot easier once you know people, and a lot stronger, I think. So just these people that were part of the tribunal obviously were active before the tribunal. I'm not saying the tribunal opened their eyes, but I mean, again, John Dugard was one of the guys behind the ICJ case. There is also ideas of new sort of citizens popular tribunals, and it's the same people again involved in them. And in terms also of, I think, let's say call them celebrities, artists, filmmakers, and I think what the tribunal did, and also because we were strategic enough to approach them with international law. it was like, we're not gonna be like the very radical activists talking right away about apartheid, about genocide. We're going to tell you, this is the law. We're using the law as the platform. Some people that were active at the time became incredible allies in the last 10 years in regards to Palestine. There are lots of them, but like Ken Loach and Roger Waters, Angela Davis, Alice Walker, all these people, like, are in terms of celebrities, are at the forefront now. And I think the tribunal also gave them this like grounding of and it was like also kind of it was very educational, I think, for a lot of people, including myself. I hung out with lawyers and barristers for like 8 years. So yeah.
I'm curious about these, like, I remember a friend of mine who I used to teach with, he always used to talk about, like, how can we turn moments into movements, right? And there's, like, in the course of my lifetime, there have been all these moments, right? And that have gone viral before, sort of, even before, like, this type of virality. Sheikh Jarrah is a really important one. It's a really important moment. It's one that obviously you've been connected to as well. Can you talk a little bit about the impact that it had on you specifically, and how it sort of, I think, began this phase of the global solidarity movement for Palestine?
Yeah. I remember, like, in 2007, so when I went to Palestine for the first time, we went to Sheikh Jarrah. We visited Sheikh Jarrah, and the thing is, I'm not sure people realize how crazy this is, right? When you go to Sheikh Jarrah, you have Palestinians that have lived there for like ever, and you really have, like, Jewish settlers from Brooklyn that speak American, saying, this is my house, fuck off. It just doesn't, it's crazy. Like, in a way, Israel is when you strip it to its core, is really a crazy concept, and it's, Sheikh Jarrah was momentous in I think, and I mean, the ripples of Sheikh Jarrah are felt today as well. I mean, for me, honestly, personally, a moment, and I think maybe because Sheikh Jarrah was kind of the beginning of my journey, but very quickly in 2008, 2009, you had Operation Cast Lead, as Israel calls it, which was the first really major operation in Gaza since 2005. I was also involved around this time with the flotilla, because one of the first flotillas, I mean, they arrived in Gaza before Operation Cast Lead with the boats. And I remember that during and after Operation Cast Lead, which lasted about 3 weeks, which, killed about 1,300 Palestinians, we felt, as activists, as a community of activists, there would be a before and an after Gaza 2008, 2009. This is a moment where, Israel shot itself in the foot. It's so blatant and obvious now what Israel is about. And you had also massive demonstrations at the time all over the world and stuff. But I think we were aware at the time that if we don't do our job, it's down to us. I mean, there's going to be a before and after Gaza if we do our job. We're not, the politicians, the institutions, the media are not going to do it. And we were always, again, aware that if we, like, it's too harsh to say if we don't do our job properly, but we're always aware that potentially in 6 months, in a year, Gaza 2008, 2009 would have been forgotten, and Israel would be, again, like a normal state. And this is what happened. And I mean, you mentioned it over and over again, and we are at this moment now, again. Maybe we'll talk about it. I'm sure we'll talk about it later, but yeah.
The flotillas, I don't remember all the details of the flotillas, and I'm sure that a lot of people listening don't. Can you just add some details? Like, how does that type of activism start? I mean, is there basically like essentially WhatsApp groups and email chains saying, okay, this is what we're going to do. This is where we're fundraising for this. We're going to actually dedicate our bodies and put our bodies in harm's way to make this statement.
So I wasn't directly involved in the first one. I wasn't involved in, the planning and stuff of the first one, which was in 2008, and which brought a few people, including Eva and Quiva and Alberto and Vittorio to Gaza. But I was very quickly involved with the rest of the Freedom Flotilla process. And so I know that it started with a lot of former ISM members. So ISM is the International Solidarity Movement. And I think it came out of the point of, and we've all been through this, I think, in the last 18 months, of kind of desperation. We have the big demonstrations, we have the lobbying, we have the petitions, we have the cultural actions and stuff. But this is not enough. What can we do look, in the last 18 months, I was like, I think if I didn't have kids, I didn't have like a family life and stuff, I would have tried to go to Gaza. I don't know what for, but like, it's so maddening that you feel like you have to put your body on the line. And I think that's what came with the flotillas as well, to say like, let's stop this. Let's use our privileges as white, European, Americans, Irish, and go there. Maybe, it was out of this, maybe they will stop. Maybe at least we will avoid more people getting killed. So, it was a massive initiative. I mean, in terms of operations, logistical, crazy fucking initiative. Sorry, by the way, for swearing.
No,
but anyway,
okay.
crazy initiative, which involved like boats coming from pretty much all over Europe, going to Cyprus or Greece, and then sailing to Gaza. This is mad. Like, you had like so complicated, infiltrated by whatever, the Mossad or others that just, made some of the boats impossible to continue, and then called on countries to make sure we couldn't use the flag of the country on the boat to actually leave Cyprus or Greece. It all came to a very big moment in 2010 with what's called now the Mavi Marmara flotilla. And people maybe don't remember, but this was I still have goosebumps because it was an incredible moment of solidarity. You had a boat from Turkey called the Mavi Marmara. We're talking a massive boat, 800 people on it, like, one of those cruise boat, pretty much, and you had, I can't remember now how many boats around the Mavi Marmara, which was smaller in size. You had people from all over the world. You had like Nobel Prize winners on the boat. You had like, celebrities on boats, and they all sailed towards Gaza. And this is important to understand Israel's impunity. Israel's commandos boarded the big boat, the Mavi Marmara, using helicopters. You have commandos, coming down from helicopters. They boarded the Mavi Marmara, killed 9 people, including 1 Turkish-American citizen. Some of them killed how do you call that? Very short, point blank range. And arrested tens of others, beat them up, confiscated all their recording equipment, phones, cameras, camcorders, to also, and that's another point, control what's coming out of this, control the information. If you control the first 48 hours, you're kind of safe. Tortured a few people psychologically. And this was another moment where we thought, actually, you know what? As bad as we knew Israel could be, all of us were shocked. Just imagine they coming on a boat, which is a Turkish NGO boat. They kill 9 people. Obviously, no one was armed, right? It was like activists. this was a moment of like, we are facing this lunatic state, this monster, out of control monster. And again, unfortunately, not much happened after that. I mean, there's a lot of legal cases and stuff, that lasted years and cost people hundreds of thousands of dollars. But Israel came out of it again. And then I think there was another flotilla. But then, I mean, the organizing committee realized that if Israelis are actually ready to kill activists, maybe the flotillas are not like kind of worth it anymore. It's just too dangerous. So I think there was another flotilla which you couldn't even, like, they arrived in international waters. Israel like intercepted the boats, boarded the boats, put everyone in jail, sent everyone back. So because it was such a big initiative in terms of finances as well and funding, I think it was then decided to stop it for a while. I know it's kind of started again with Gaza now. But the fact that the flotilla, which people have been talking about this time around, hasn't left for Gaza yet, shows how difficult it is.
Yeah.
On all aspects. Yeah.
It's one of those things where it's like, okay, we can't beat them in the courts because the courts are rigged. None of the laws apply for some reason. There's this like illogical loophole where none of these laws apply, right? And then you can't throw your bodies in front of them because the flotilla example is one of them, right? Then there's a question of, okay, can you convince Israelis that the nature of the state, the manifestation of this idea, is unjust from within? And the two books that you've written with Noam Chomsky and on Pappé, I think, try to do that. And I'd love to hear you talk a little bit about those projects and your relationship with these people.
Yeah. So first, I think we can beat Israel in the courts, but it's not about the courts in a way. It's about the application of the verdicts of the court. The ICJ has been very clear, no negotiations, nothing until the occupation ends. It's very clear. First, you
but they don't have the power, right? Courts don't have powers unless you have security apparatus. So it is.
Yeah. And it's down now, once the court can come back with a verdict, it's down to states to follow the courts. And we've seen with the ICC how political those courts are, and the states that are obligated under their own laws to implement the findings that they don't implement when it comes to Israel. It's mad. I think you're right. Like, putting your body on the line also it's maybe, we're not really useful once we're dead or on our knees or in jail, I feel. So, and then I'll address your question, of course, but I think what we have for sure is the moral high ground. And I think that what's been happening in the last 18 months is so clear. We are in a moment of extreme clarity. And I think that that's it. Palestine will never be forgotten. They're trying to, make Palestinians disappear. They're trying to say they don't exist, but it's over now. Whatever happens, Palestine will be in people's minds. I mean, I've been on demonstration for 20 years, and I've never seen demonstrations like in the last 18 months. First, people that I've never been, who have never organized a demonstration, don't realize how much work goes into organizing one demo. Organizing one demo every week for 18 months is incredible. It's an incredible show of solidarity and the people in the demonstrations. I mean, I was in Paris. I have never seen demonstrations so colorful, so creative, with, people from Congo, with the LGBTQI movement or whatever, So I think Palestine has become, and people have realized that it's become this, you cannot not talk about Palestine anymore. But to come to your question, I have no hope whatsoever that the change will come from inside. And it's not me saying it. I told you in 2007, I went with the Israeli Committee Against House Demolition. They had an office in West Jerusalem, which is, where Israeli lives, Israeli Jews anyway. And Jeff Halper, years ago, told me we closed the office. No one's interested anymore. We have no Israelis coming to say what's happening, what's wrong with Palestine. So, he was like, hope that the change will come from within is dead. Obviously, there are amazing Israeli activists, but they're so few. They're so oppressed, repressed. A lot of them have had to leave Israel. That I don't think, even though, in the last few weeks, we've seen a lot of reservists of the Israeli army refusing to go to Gaza. They had a letter about, like yesterday, of 1,000 of them, calling for the war in Gaza to end. You have the British Board of Deputies in the UK, which is a very Zionist board, coming out with also a letter yesterday, 32 of them saying, we don't stand behind Israel's action in Gaza anymore. But the premise, you have hundreds of thousands of Israelis in the streets, but the premises are not right? They're not asking for an end of the occupation. They're not asking for the end of apartheid. They're asking for an end of the war because too many of our soldiers are being killed and we have hostages left. So I think the moment of reckoning in Israel has not arrived yet. And I think that, and people have to understand how the Israeli project, the Zionist project, is a very successful one. The way they have framed who they are, what they represent, is, people in Israel, Israeli Jews are brainwashed from a very, very early age. And my friend Nurit Peled, who's an Israeli academic, wrote about this when she wrote Palestinians or Arabs in Israeli school books. As soon as you can read, as soon as you can see, everything is created to make you believe that your neighbor next door, if he's Arab, is the enemy and wants you dead. And in Israel, military service is compulsory. It's 3 years, and it's at 18 years old. Usually, I lived in France when I was due to do my military service. I was studying, so they were like, oh, as long as you study, you don't go to the army. In Israel, you go to the army as soon as you finish school. And it's also understandable, right? When you're 18 and you haven't gone abroad, you haven't been to university, you
the most impressionable point of your life. Yeah.
Exactly, yeah. And just realize that if you have been brainwashed from 5 years old until 18, and at 18, we put you in the West Bank, in Hebron, in Halil, with an M16, and you are surrounded by people that we have told you from 5 years old onwards are animals who wants you dead. First you have, breaking the silence, this Israeli NGO, fear is incredible. If you are scared and you have an M16 in your hand, you shoot at everything that moves. And we've seen it in Gaza as well when they killed Israeli hostages nearly a year ago now. So there is this fear and this, completely brainwashed nation. And I think also it's down to cognitive dissonance. When you think what you believe in is right, and when you've been thinking like this for 50 years, it's a lot easier to keep thinking it's right than because knowing the truth, your world will collapse, right? You have to rethink everything, your relationship with others, what you are on earth for. So I think a lot of people are refusing to, in a way, admit what's happening. But I don't know. I'm pretty sure saying so that Gaza this time would have opened the eyes of a few Israelis anyway. And because I didn't address the book.
No,
Sorry,
I want to talk a little. I love what you're saying in terms of it's such an interesting perspective, and obviously an informed one, that I'm curious about who these books are for. Who is it like Ilan Pappé talking to when he writes these books? I mean, obviously it's a book between a conversation between Noam Chomsky and Ilan Pappé. You're editing both of them. Who are they for?
It's a very interesting question. So remember that these books, the first one, Gaza in Crisis, I think was in 2008.
Yeah, published in 2010.
2010, yeah. So we worked on it like 2008, 2009 or something, which is like 15 years ago, I guess. Yeah, 15, 16 years ago. It's I mean, these books came out of like nowhere, really. I mean, for me, like the way I understood Palestine did start with Chomsky, his book, Understanding Power. Ilan Pappé quickly arrived after that in terms of, which also shows that the way I understood Palestine was from two Jewish thinkers, including one Israeli Jew, and it shows how racist also academia is, and the publishing world is. That you had many Palestinian voices that could have opened my eyes, but it's two Jewish guys that did. And we spoke about this. I remember because I did a short interview with Noam Chomsky, which was mad for me. I was like, it was for Palestine News, the Palestine Solidarity Campaign, kind of little, fanzine kind of stuff. It's not a fanzine, you call that whatever, the little stuff they were doing.
Zine, yeah.
Yeah, and so I emailed Chomsky and he replied, yes, I'll do the interview. We did, ask him like 10 questions online. He answered. And then we started talking on email with Chomsky. And then a publisher told me, why won't you do a short book with Chomsky? And I was like, are you mad? It's Chomsky. Anyway, Chomsky accepted. But then I wanted to have him in conversation with somebody else. And I told Noam, like, I want a Palestinian in conversation with you. And remember, this was 2008.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't know how to put this, but it's like, because it's Chomsky, you can't put him with like a 20 years old Palestinian scholar. It wouldn't work, and even the book wouldn't work. So I was like, no, I can't think in a way of anyone of like, not your stature, because Chomsky is Chomsky, but that I can put you with in this book. And Chomsky himself said, guess what? Because racism, you have no, why Palestinian scholars are not as well known as me. It's because of the structure and the structural racism. So then, because I knew Ilan a bit, and they had like different point of views, and Chomsky's in the US, Ilan was in Palestine, but then left, but was like a very, very much Israeli Jew. I sort of said, like, maybe we can just, and I mean, Ilan is really the most Palestinian of Israelis I know. Like, it's, so yeah, we put them, I put them together, and this was amazing. But I at the time, I was like, these two are maybe well known enough for this book to be read. I wasn't sure by whom, but I was like, maybe people, because it's Chomsky, because it's Pappé, because they've never done this, like together, this conversation, people read the book. And we wanted a book of interviews as well, because it makes it more like approachable. And, it's not, you can read Pappé's Ethnic Cleansing of Palestine. It's like 300 pages of like very detailed stuff. I wanted the book to be very, again, approachable for people. Like, not, approachable isn't the right word, but easy, like an easy read for people to understand very simple question. What is Zionism? What is Israel? What is 48? What is the Nakba? So, yeah, I think these books were obviously not addressed to Palestinians or Lebanese or Egyptians, or it was the West, but it wasn't Israelis. We never thought, let's talk to Israelis. It was more of the Western white people.
There was this interview with Steve Bannon. Do you know who Steve Bannon is?
Yeah.
So there's this interview with Steve Bannon where he's talking to, I forget who he's talking to. I think he's talking to a room of fundraisers. And he's saying, it's not an interview, it's a quote, where he's saying the biggest threat historically, in this moment, the biggest threat to Israel is not activists. It's not Arab activists. It's not the ICJ. These are not the biggest threat. The biggest threat to Israel and to Zionism is liberal Jewish Americans and Europeans, like the not in our name folks, who are saying, wait, hold on. This is not what Judaism is about. This is not what my faith is about. Have you seen, first of all, do you agree with that? Maybe that's the easiest first question. Do you agree with Steve Bannon's estimation?
I agree, of course, that Jewish people saying not in our name is a step in the right direction, of course, because it's all being done, whether they like it or not, under their name, their names. Israel is the self-proclaimed Jewish state. And every time Netanyahu speaks, he said, I'm doing this for the Jewish people. He never mentions Israelis. By the way, people don't know that in Israel, on your ID, you are Jewish or you are Arab, Israeli. In France, you're French. You're not a Jew. In Israel, you're a Jew or you're a Muslim. Israeli is not, there's no nationality in Israel. It's the nation of the Jewish people, So obviously it's crucial, and obviously it helps change the narrative, because people say people who don't like Israel and its policies are anti-Semites. So once you have, tens of thousands of Jews in the US with Jewish Voices for Peace or others speaking out against that, it's massive. It's massive, of course. And I think, I'm not sure if that's the most dangerous part, because I think Israel has dissociated itself for a long time now from progressive Jews. Israel is a fascist state. Israel is in bed with fascists all over the world. And in the US, they're in bed before, before being in bed with like the Jewish community of the US, they're in bed with like crazy Christian fundamentalist or fascist. So, and that's what I keep telling people. And I think, Mohammed El-Kurd wrote this article again a few months ago. I've just forgot the title now, which said that it's not my fault if the settler who was tried to steal my house was a Jew. And by this he meant, if the guy been Italian, Greek, Spanish, I'd have fought back the same. It's got nothing to do with Jewishness. It's got everything to do with you are stealing my house. And it's got everything to do with fascism. And we're seeing more and more. Israel is not, it's got nothing to do with Jews. Israel is a fascist state. And, they've organized this conference against anti-Semitism in Israel. They've invited all the anti-Semites of this world to attend. So I think the role of Jews is crucial, 100%, and all over the world. And you have lots of organizations that were born in the last 2 years of Jewish activists that are more and more radical. So anti-Zionist Jews. It's not even anti-occupation anymore. It's anti-Zionist Jews, and it's crucial. So on this point, and I think that's probably the only point, I would agree with Steve Bannon. Yeah.
I want to talk to you a little bit about if you were to project the next couple decades, which is obviously so hard to do. Obviously, it's a ridiculous premise, but Um, like global politics is shifting clearly, and where every day seems like it's like a year's worth of change. Um, in the solidarity movement more broadly, what does that movement look like when we look eastward or when we look to Africa, where there's all of a sudden like different sources of power, right? If we're moving into a new sort of a Chinese century or a century that's related, where so much power comes from Asia, comes from South Asia, and comes from Africa. What's the solidarity movement look like there? How does it play out there? I mean, we know how it plays out in the US. We know how it plays out in Europe. How does it play out in Asia?
So first, I want to say that I was in Paris, like I'm really bad with dates, but I think this was a few months back. There was this massive event called La Fête de l'Humanité, so the Party of Humanity. It's every year. It's formerly the Communist Party. I mean, still the Communist Party organizing it, but it's a really big event. There's hundreds of thousands of people coming over 3 days listening to speeches about, social justice, Palestine,
Humanity
Congo.
Festival, basically.
Yeah, the Humanity Festival, yeah. Ilan Pappé was invited, and I was moderating his conversation with Omar Somi, a Palestinian. And so we had lunch, and I spoke to Ilan, and I was like, man, Ilan, what the hell is happening? What do we do? I was like, we've lost. And Ilan was like, Frank, I'm very pessimistic. This was like at least 6-8 months ago. I'm very pessimistic about the short-term future. But we are, believe me, experiencing the end of Zionism and the end of Israel. And again, when I say the end of Israel, just to make it clear, I don't say like the end of Israelis. I say the end of Israel as an apartheid state. And, it's important to also remind ourselves that history didn't start yesterday. History is a long process, and that the apartheid in South Africa didn't fall in like 10 days. And that what we are seeing now is potentially the end of this crazy, inhumane project. Because how long a state and a people, in a way, based on hatred of pretty much everybody else can sustain itself. That at some point, even as a person, even if I wake up every morning, Frank, and my primary feeling towards everybody else is hate, you collapse as an individual, right? And so the interesting part is I left this festival and I got on a cab with a Palestinian from Gaza who had left Gaza about 3 months ago. So he had experienced about 6 months of genocide. And he said exactly the same as Ilan. He said, Frank, the next few months, maybe the next few years are going to be really terrible. But Israel is dead. Israel is lost. So that's something, I mean, if an Israeli, if Ilan says it, if a Palestinian from Gaza says it, that we have to try to hold on to, because we're desperate right now to hold on anything that is a bit positive. In terms of the movement, I've got to say that I've got a very, very Euro-centered vision of the movement. I'm French. I live in Belgium. I spent lots of my time in London. I know lots of folks in the US. But I think the global South, they know what we're talking about because they've experienced it one way or another. The colonized of Algeria, of Tunisia, of Morocco, of South Africa, the former slaves, they've experienced it. And it's so different. And also, one of the things that's been the hardest for me, and I know for a lot of people, is you in your house and you seeing what you see, you're experiencing what you're experiencing, you're seeing pictures and videos of dead children, of hospitals being bombed, and you leave your house or you leave your little group and you go outside, and I'm talking about this in Europe, right? You go outside and you see people in the streets, you go buy bread, you go buy, and you look at people in the eyes and you feel that they don't see what you see, they don't experience what you experience. It's been like a crushing feeling, honestly, of like, but my mother lives in Morocco. She was born in Morocco. She went back 10 years ago or 15 years ago now. And 2 weeks ago, no, 2 weeks ago, a month ago, we were in Morocco with the kids. And man, looking at people, I was like, we don't have to talk. I know, you know, I know. What do we do now? And this is very important, because it comes from an anti-colonial point of view that we've been so, we've never faced as white Europeans. We've obviously, the others have experienced it, and it's also, I'm sort of mixing a few things here, but, this resilience of the Palestinian people, this sumud of the Palestinian people, that I hate this word, because I'm like, why should they be resilient?
And like
ask a
congratulated
Palestinian,
for it.
Yeah, you're like, do you want to be resilient? They go, no, I want equality and peace and justice. Fuck me being resilient, But anyway, they are resilient because they've experienced the worst, People of Algeria, people of South Africa, they're resilient because they've built this armor. Because, it's like when you're born, you're a kid, you get all the illnesses you can get because your body's not ready for it. And then you become resilient.
Yeah.
But us white Europeans and stuff are not resilient. And that's why also, like, and it's okay to cry. It's okay to crumble. I've seen so many of my friends like collapsing. I've felt like collapsing a few times, but I'm like, damn, we're collapsing because we're seeing images on the street. We are not resilient. We don't know what the real struggle is. And I think this moment in time, we're going to have to learn, because I think the struggle now, people have this thing about, until now I'm safe, until now I'm safe, until now I'm safe, until now I'm safe. And that's why also they don't sometimes stand in solidarity. They don't, put themselves in danger and stuff. But I think now we're seeing it happening in the US, we're seeing it happening in Europe, the criminalization of protest, of dissent, of pro-Palestine solidarity means that we are now going to face fascism as well. And we are going to have to learn to build this armor, because we are facing it. We're going to face it. And we have to learn from these movements. So I think, Asia, Africa, they know. The fact that South Africa was the country standing up to the rest of the world was so momentous, And actually, an anecdote, when we had a session of the Russell Tribunal in South Africa addressing apartheid, this was the favorite session of everybody that I know, because we went to South Africa, we met with lots of local groups, activists, we went to the townships and stuff, and every time we started to speak, to explain what we were doing, they were like, shh, we know. We know what struggling means. We know what armed resistance means. We know what boycott means. And it was like a very important, realization that, yeah, they know. And now we're going to have to learn from them, not obviously us teaching them what resistance is, Yeah.
Before I let you go, can I ask you to give me a recommendation for some books?
Wow. Oh, okay. So, I've read this book. I think a lot of people are talking about it, but I think it touched, personally, it touched on every point that I have been feeling in the last 18 months. And I always get the title wrong. So Omar al-Akkad, excuse me again. It's like one day we will always have been against this. Wait, I need to get the title, man. So one day everyone will have always been against this. It's by this American Egyptian author called Omar al-Akkad. It's an incredible book. I just loved it so much because it's just, it talks about this moment. It talks about privileges. It talks about being a brown person in the US. It talks about being silent or being vocal in a very beautiful way. And I read it about a month ago, and I just loved it. There are definitely a few others, but I can't really remember now.
Yeah.
But I guess, this one came first in my head. So this one like really sort of
Amazing.
touched me. Yeah.
Okay. If you want to find Frank, you can find him on Instagram for Frank Barat. That's Barat. You can also find him on YouTube. Huge recommendation for his YouTube channel, Frank Barat 77. If you like this interview, there is like new interviews that go up almost like every other day about Palestine, about solidarity. Amazing stuff, Frank. Thanks so much, man. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, Mikey. I loved talking to you. Thanks, man.